The warning came as a ripple down the trench. "Stand to!" Private Thomas Hale was already awake. Dawn hadn't yet broken, but the sky carried that thin, waiting grey that meant trouble. He scrambled to the fire step beside Corporal Finch, boots slipping on damp duckboards polished slick by weeks of mud and boots and fear. Across no man's land, shadows moved. Then came the whistle. It rose from the German line, thin and sharp, and the earth answered with shouting. "They're coming," someone breathed. Finch didn't waste words. "Steady," he said, voice calm as if calling the time in a quiet street. "Wait for it." Thomas gripped his rifle, sight fixed on the advancing shapes. They came through smoke and early mist, stumbling over wire, rifles held tight. The distance between them shrank with terrifying speed. "Now," Finch said. The trench erupted, rifles cracked in staggered rhythm. Machine guns hammered from further down the line, stitching the ground with dirt and fire. Thomas fired, worked the bolt, fired again. The recoil slammed into his shoulder, grounding him in the moment. He aimed low, just as he'd been taught. A figure ahead pitched forward into the churned mud. The air filled with noise, shouting in two languages, bullets snapping overhead, the dull thud of grenades landing short of the parapet. A blast showered them with earth. Thomas ducked, ears ringing, and felt Finch's hand shove him back upright. "Stay on it," Finch barked. A group of Germans reached the wire directly ahead, hacking at it, desperate and exposed. Finch leaned into his rifle, precise and unhurried. One fell, then another. Thomas followed his lead, breath steadying despite the chaos. A grenade arced toward their section. "Down!" They dropped as it burst against the sandbags, the explosion punching the breath from Thomas's lungs. Smoke rolled over them. For a heartbeat, the world went muffled and distant. Through the haze, figures scrambled toward the parapet. Finch was already up. Bayonets! Steel flashed along the trench line. Thomas fixed his blade with shaking hands, just as a helmeted head appeared above the sandbags. There was no time for fear, only motion. He thrust forward as he'd practiced 100 times on straw dummies. The attacker vanished from sight. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the momentum faltered. The machine guns found their range. The attackers slowed, then wavered. A whistle blew again, this one retreating, desperate. The grey figures pulled back across the torn field, leaving the ground littered and still. The trench fell into a stunned quiet, broken only by groans and the distant rumble of artillery resuming its steady argument. Thomas lowered his rifle. His hands shook now that it was over. He hadn't noticed the cut along his cheek until Finch wiped it with a grimy thumb. "Still here," Finch said simply. Thomas nodded, swallowing hard. "Still here." They peered over the parapet together. The dawn had finally broken, pale light spreading across the scarred earth. Smoke drifted low over no man's land, softening its brutal edges. The trench remained a wound in the world, but for that morning it held.